I took my daughter's school project to a science teacher for grading, and he called the bomb squad before even looking at it. Mr. Donnelly backed away from my daughter's volcano model like I'd just placed a live grenade on his desk. His face went white, and he grabbed his phone without breaking eye contact with the shoebox-sized papier-mâché mountain Zara had spent 3 weeks building. I told him it was just baking soda and vinegar for the eruption demonstration, that she'd followed the instructions exactly from the science fair packet he'd sent home. He held up one hand to stop me from talking and dialed 911 with the other. His voice shook when he told the dispatcher there was a potential explosive device at Franklin Elementary and they needed to evacuate immediately. The fire alarm started screaming before I could process what was happening. Mr. Donnelly was already herding me toward the door, refusing to let me grab Zara's project, saying the professionals would handle it. I'd brought the volcano in early that morning before school started because Zara had been sick with strep throat all week and didn't want to miss the submission deadline. She'd worked so hard on the painted mountains and the little Lego village at the base. Now her teacher was treating it like a bomb. Teachers poured into the hallway with confused students, everyone moving toward the exits in that practice shuffle we'd done 100 times for fire drills. Except this time, parents in the parking lot were getting urgent texts to pick up their kids immediately. This time, police cars were arriving with lights flashing. This time, Mr. Donnelly was standing by the main entrance pointing at me and talking to 2 officers who immediately walked in my direction with their hands near their belts. Officer Kapoor asked for my identification while Officer Barnes stood slightly behind me and to my left, in that position cops take when they're not sure if you're about to run. I handed over my driver's license and explained again about the volcano, about Zara being sick, about just trying to turn in her project on time. Officer Kapoor wrote down everything I said in a small notebook, while Officer Barnes asked if I had any weapons on me and whether I'd consent to a pat-down for everyone's safety. I said yes, because what else could I say? His hands were professional and quick, but I felt every parent and teacher watching from the parking lot as he checked my pockets and waistband. Officer Kapoor asked why I'd brought the project in a closed box instead of displaying it openly. I told him it had a lid to protect the papier-mâché during transport, that the instructions from Mr. Donnelly specifically said to cover projects during transit. He asked if anyone else had touched the project besides me and Zara. I said no, just us. Why would anyone else touch it? Officer Barnes asked where I'd gotten the materials. I said the craft store on Madison Avenue, same place every parent in this school gets supplies. The questions kept coming in that calm cop voice that made everything sound like an interrogation. How long had the project been in my possession? Had I left it unattended at any point? Did anyone else have access to my home? Who else lived at my address? I answered everything while watching a bomb disposal truck pull into the school parking lot. 3 technicians in heavy protective gear carried equipment toward the school entrance. One of them had what looked like a robot on a wheeled platform. Another carried a case of tools. The third was talking on a radio, coordinating with someone I couldn't see. The entire school was evacuated now, 400 kids sitting on the grass of the adjacent park with their teachers taking attendance. Parents who'd gotten the emergency texts were arriving in waves, confused and frightened, pulling their children close. I spotted my ex-wife Rachel's car screeching into the lot and my stomach dropped. She jumped out and scanned the crowd until she found me standing with the 2 police officers. Her face went from worried to furious in the time it took her to cross the parking lot. She demanded to know what I'd done, why the school was evacuated, where Zara was. Officer Kapoor told her to calm down and step back. Rachel said she had every right to know what was happening, since I had clearly done something dangerous with our daughter's school project. I tried to explain, but she talked over me, telling the officers that I'd been increasingly unstable since the divorce, that she'd documented my erratic behavior, that she'd warned the school about letting me have unsupervised time with Zara. Officer Barnes asked if we were divorced. Rachel said yes, and that she had primary custody for good reason. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos, showing them texts I'd sent late at night, asking to talk. Messages I'd left on her voicemail that she characterized as aggressive. My lawyer had told me to stop contacting her outside the custody agreement, but sometimes I just needed to coordinate something about Zara, and she wouldn't answer during approved hours. Rachel told the officers I'd been fired from my job 3 months ago for insubordination and hadn't found steady work since. She said I'd missed 2 child support payments. She said Zara had come home from my weekend visits talking about how Daddy seemed sad all the time and forgot to make dinner. Every true thing presented in the worst possible light. Every private struggle now public ammunition. Officer Kapoor asked if I'd like to wait in my vehicle while they secured the scene. It wasn't really a question. Officer Barnes escorted me to my car and stood nearby, while I sat in the driver's seat with the door open. Through the windshield, I watched Rachel talk to the officers, her hands moving in that animated way she had when she was building a narrative. I'd seen her do this before, during the custody hearings, making me sound dangerous, when I was just depressed, making every mistake sound like a pattern, making love for my daughter look like obsession. The bomb squad technicians emerged from the school after 20 minutes. One of them was carrying Zara's volcano in a clear containment box. They placed it on a table they'd set up in the parking lot and started examining it with handheld devices. Bright lights illuminated the papier-mâché while they took photographs from every angle. A technician used some kind of probe to examine the interior where Zara had placed the baking soda and vinegar chambers according to the instructions. Parents pressed closer, trying to see what was happening. Teachers formed a barrier, keeping the students back in the park. Rachel stood with a group of other mothers, all of them glancing in my direction. I heard fragments of their conversation on the wind. Always knew something was off about him. Poor Zara having to deal with that. Rachel should have full custody after this. The lead bomb technician walked toward Officer Kapoor, and they had a quiet conversation I couldn't hear. The technician's body language was relaxed now, casual, nothing like the careful tension from earlier. He gestured toward the volcano and shrugged. Officer Kapoor nodded and wrote something in his notebook. Then they both looked at Mr. Donnelly, who was standing with the principal near the school entrance. Mr. Donnelly's face was still pale, but he was nodding vigorously at whatever they were saying. Officer Kapoor walked back to my car and asked me to step out. He said the device had been cleared and was exactly what I'd claimed. A science fair volcano made with household materials. He said I was free to go, but the school might want to talk to me about proper procedures for dropping off projects in the future. I asked if I could take Zara's volcano home. He said I'd need to ask the school administration about that. Mr. Donnelly wouldn't make eye contact with me when I approached. The principal, Mrs. Vasquez, stepped between us and said in a cold, professional voice that given the disruption and concern caused today, they would need to hold a meeting before deciding whether to allow Zara's project to be submitted. I told her my daughter had done nothing wrong. Mrs. Vasquez said she understood, but there were protocols they needed to follow after an incident like this. I asked what incident. The bomb squad clearing a volcano made from the instruction sheet her own teacher provided. She said we'd discuss it at the meeting and I'd receive a call to schedule it. Parents were picking up their children now that the all-clear had been given. I watched kids being signed out and led to cars by relieved mothers and fathers. Rachel was already at the dismissal table demanding they bring Zara out immediately. Zara emerged from the building holding her teacher's hand, and the moment she saw Rachel, she burst into tears. Rachel scooped her up, and Zara buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Rachel was rubbing Zara's back and whispering something in her ear while glaring at me over our daughter's head. I started walking toward them, and Officer Barnes moved to intercept me. He said, maybe it was best if I let them have some space right now. I said Zara was my daughter too. He said he understood, but emotions were high, and perhaps I should follow my custody agreement about pickup times. My custody agreement gave me every other weekend and one evening per week. Today was Thursday, not my day. Rachel carried Zara to her car and strapped her into the booster seat. Zara's face was blotchy from crying and she looked so small and confused. I waved, but I don't know if she saw me. Rachel drove away without acknowledging I existed. Other parents were giving me a wide berth as they collected their children. I heard whispers and saw pointed looks. The man who brought a bomb to school. The unstable ex-husband. Poor Rachel having to deal with him. I sat in my car for a long time after the parking lot emptied. Zara's volcano was still on the table where the bomb squad had examined it. Nobody had moved it back inside. The papier-mâché mountains Zara had painted so carefully were slightly crushed from being carried in the containment box. The little Lego village had scattered pieces. All that work for nothing because her teacher panicked. My phone rang that evening with a number I didn't recognize. The woman identified herself as Karen Rothstein from Child Protective Services. She said they'd received a report about the incident at Franklin Elementary and needed to schedule a home visit to ensure Zara's safety. I asked who had made the report. She said she couldn't disclose that information, but given the nature of the complaint, they needed to investigate. I asked what complaint. She said concerns had been raised about my judgment and stability, about potentially dangerous materials in my home, about my ability to provide adequate supervision during my custody time. I told her I'd brought a science fair project to school, that it had been cleared by the bomb squad, that there was nothing dangerous. She said she understood my perspective, but they had to follow up on all reports involving children. We scheduled the visit for the following Monday. She said I should have my home clean and organized, should have adequate food in the refrigerator, should be prepared to answer questions about my employment and living situation. After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, seeing it through CPS eyes. The place was clean enough, but sparse. I'd taken the apartment after Rachel got the house in the divorce. One bedroom for me, sleeping on the couch when Zara visited so she could have the bedroom. Furniture from Goodwill and that secondhand store on 5th Street. No art on the walls because I'd let Rachel have all the nice things. Figured Zara needed stability at her mom's place more than I needed matching furniture. The refrigerator had milk, eggs, some deli, meat, and bread. Not exactly barren, but not abundant either. Money was tight since the layoff and Rachel's lawyer taking a chunk for child support. I could make it look better by Monday, buy more groceries, maybe borrow a few things from my sister to make the place seem more established. The email arrived from Principal Vasquez at 9 p.m. She informed me that Franklin Elementary was suspending my drop-off and pickup privileges pending a review by the District Safety Committee. All future exchanges would need to happen off-school property with a third party present. She included a phone number for the family court mediator who handled custody modifications. The email was copied to Rachel, to the district superintendent, and to someone named Douglas Brenner, who was apparently the school district's legal counsel. I read it 3 times trying to understand how helping my daughter turned into me being banned from her school. My phone rang again. Rachel, I almost didn't answer, but maybe she was calling to acknowledge this was getting out of hand. Maybe we could work this out like adults. Her voice was ice cold. She said she was filing an emergency motion to modify custody and suspend my parenting time until the CPS investigation concluded. She said she'd warned me my instability would eventually put Zara at risk, and today proved her right. I tried to explain again about the volcano, but she cut me off. She said, what kind of father brings an unidentified container to a school and refuses to open it when asked? I said, nobody asked me to open it. Mr. Donnelly just started calling 911. She said Mr. Donnelly felt threatened by my behavior. I asked what behavior. She said I'd been aggressive and argumentative when he'd tried to keep everyone safe. That was a complete lie. I'd been confused and trying to explain. Rachel said her lawyer already had statements from 3 teachers who witnessed my confrontational attitude. I'd barely spoken to anyone besides Mr. Donnelly and the police. How could 3 teachers have statements? She said the court date was set for next week and I should get a lawyer if I wanted to fight it. But given my financial situation, maybe I should just accept supervised visitation. I couldn't afford the lawyer I'd used for the divorce. He'd been $1,500 just for the custody agreement, and that was with a payment plan I'd barely managed. Emergency custody modifications cost more because everything was expedited. I called anyway and left a voicemail explaining the situation. He called back the next morning and said his retainer for this kind of case was $3,000 up front. I didn't have $3,000. I barely had $300. He gave me the number for legal aid but said they were swamped and might not be able to take emergency cases. I spent Friday calling every legal aid office in the county. All of them said the same thing. 6 to 8 week wait for intake appointments. None of them handled emergency custody cases unless there was evidence of abuse. I explained the whole situation to 4 different paralegals who all took notes and said they'd add me to the waiting list. One of them suggested I represent myself and gave me a website with family court forms. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, reading through custody modification procedures and legal standards, best interest of the child, fitness of the parent, substantial change in circumstances. I tried to draft a response to Rachel's motion, but every sentence sounded defensive and desperate. Your Honor, I'm not dangerous. I just brought a volcano to school. Your Honor, my ex-wife is lying about my behavior, but I can't prove it. Your Honor, please don't take away the only thing I have left. I deleted everything and started over. By midnight, I had 2 pages explaining the facts of what happened. The bomb squad clearance, the school's overreaction. It wasn't good, but it was something. Monday morning, Karen Rothstein arrived at exactly 10 a.m. for the CPS home visit. She was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with a tired expression that suggested she'd seen too much already in her career. I'd spent the weekend cleaning obsessively and buying groceries I couldn't afford. The apartment looked more presentable than it had in months. She walked through, slowly taking notes on a tablet. She opened the refrigerator and photographed the contents. She checked the bathroom for mold and proper toiletries. She examined the bedroom where Zara slept on my weekends, noting the twin bed and the stuffed animals arranged on the shelf. She asked how often Zara visited. I said every other weekend and Wednesday evenings per the custody agreement. She asked about my employment status. I told her I was between jobs after being laid off from my position as a logistics coordinator. She asked how long I'd been unemployed. I said 3 months. She asked how I was supporting myself. I said unemployment benefits and some freelance consulting work. She wrote everything down. She asked about my mental health. I said I was fine, just going through the stress of divorce and job loss like a lot of people. She asked if I was taking any medications. I said no. She asked if I'd ever been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. I said not formally. She asked what that meant. I said I'd felt depressed after the divorce, but who wouldn't? I hadn't seen a doctor about it. She made a note that looked longer than my answer deserved. She asked about the incident at the school. I explained the entire situation, showed her the instruction packet from Mr. Donnelly about building volcanoes, showed her the receipt from the craft store where I'd bought the supplies. She photographed everything. She asked if I understood why the school had been concerned. I said honestly no, it was a science project following their own instructions. Karen asked if I'd ever been arrested. I said no. She asked if there had been any domestic violence in my marriage to Rachel. I said absolutely not. She asked if Rachel had ever filed a restraining order. I said no, but she'd threatened to during the divorce, when I'd tried to talk to her about custody arrangements. Karen made another long note. She asked about my relationship with Zara. I showed her photos on my phone, the 2 of us at the park, at the movies, making pancakes in the kitchen. Karen asked if Zara seemed happy during visits. I said yes, we had a great relationship. She asked if Zara had ever expressed fear of me or reluctance to visit. I said never. She asked if I'd ever disciplined Zara physically. I said no, I'd never hit her, never would. She asked what methods I used for discipline. I said timeouts and talking through behavior, same as Rachel did. Karen spent another 20 minutes asking about my daily routine, my support system, my plans for future employment. I answered everything as honestly as I could. She said she'd need to interview Zara separately and would coordinate that with Rachel. She said her report would be submitted to the court within 10 days. She said based on what she'd seen today, there were no immediate safety concerns, but she'd need to complete the full investigation before making a recommendation. After she left, I sat on the couch feeling exhausted. The apartment was cleaner than it had been in months, but emptier somehow. All the staging to prove I was capable. all the effort to show I deserved my own daughter's presence in my life. The court hearing was scheduled for Wednesday at 9 a.m. I arrived early wearing the only suit I still owned, the one from job interviews that hadn't led anywhere. Rachel was already there with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Vance, who'd destroyed me during the divorce proceedings. They sat on the opposite side of the hallway, not acknowledging me. Rachel was wearing a navy dress that made her look professional and stable. Patricia was reviewing documents with that confident efficiency lawyers have when they know they're winning. I had my 2-page response and a folder of documentation about the volcano project. The bailiff called us into the courtroom, and Judge Ramona McKenzie took the bench. She was in her 50s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and wasn't impressed by any of them. Patricia stood and presented Rachel's emergency motion to modify custody. She described the incident at Franklin Elementary as reckless endangerment, calling my actions a substantial change in circumstances warranting immediate intervention. She presented statements from Mr. Donnelly saying I'd been agitated and refused to explain what was in the box. Statements from 2 other teachers saying I'd become confrontational with police. A statement from Rachel describing my deteriorating mental state and missed child support payments. She presented my late-night text messages to Rachel as evidence of instability. She moved to admit all of it into evidence. I stood when the judge asked for my response. My voice shook when I said I'd brought a science fair project to school following the teacher's own instructions. Judge McKenzie asked why the teacher felt threatened. I said I didn't know. He'd called 911 before I could explain anything. She asked if I'd raised my voice or behaved aggressively. I said no. I'd been confused and trying to help. Patricia interrupted to say 3 school staff witnessed my behavior. The judge told her to let me finish. I explained about Zara being sick and not wanting her to miss the deadline. I presented the science fair instruction packet from Mr. Donnelly, showing the exact project requirements. I showed the bomb squad clearance report I'd requested from the police department proving the volcano was exactly what I'd claimed. I showed receipts for the craft supplies. Judge McKenzie examined everything while I stood waiting. She asked why I'd put the volcano in a closed box. I said the instructions specified covering projects during transport to prevent damage. She asked if I'd become argumentative with school staff. I said I'd only spoken to Mr. Donnelly and the police, and I'd been cooperative with both. She asked about the statements claiming otherwise. I said I didn't know why people were saying things that weren't true. Patricia stood and said the issue wasn't whether the volcano was eventually cleared, but that I'd created a dangerous situation through poor judgment. She said the CPS investigation was ongoing, and until it concluded, Zara shouldn't be exposed to my instability. She moved for supervised visitation only, 2 hours per week at a neutral location with a court-appointed monitor. Judge McKenzie asked about my employment. I told her I was between jobs. She asked about missed child support. I admitted I'd been late twice but was working on catching up. She asked about the text messages to Rachel. I said I was just trying to coordinate about Zara. Rachel's lawyer presented them on a screen, and they looked worse than I remembered. 3 a.m. messages asking to talk. Voicemails where my voice sounded slurred from exhaustion saying I missed my family. Everything presented as harassment when it had just been loneliness. Judge McKenzie reviewed the CPS report that Karen Rothstein had submitted. She read it silently for what felt like forever. Then she said based on the preliminary findings and the concerning incident at the school, she was granting a temporary modification of custody pending the completion of the CPS investigation. My parenting time would be reduced to 4 hours per week supervised at the Family Connection Center. I would be responsible for paying the supervision fees of $60 per session. She said this was temporary and we'd reconvene in 30 days after CPS completed their assessment. Patricia thanked the judge. I stood there unable to process what had just happened. 4 hours a week with someone watching my every interaction with my own daughter. Supervised like I was dangerous. The hearing was over in less than 30 minutes. Rachel walked out without looking at me. I sat in the courtroom after everyone left trying to understand how everything had collapsed so quickly. One science project had cost me my daughter. The Family Connection Center was a converted house on the south side where parents met with children under supervision. The waiting room had toys that were too young for Zara and parenting magazines that assumed you needed advice on basic care. The supervisor assigned to me was named Denise, a gray-haired woman with a clipboard who explained the rules. No inappropriate conversation. No discussing the other parent. No gifts or food without prior approval. She'd be taking notes on everything and reporting to the court. Zara arrived with Rachel, who dropped her off without coming inside. Zara looked confused when she saw the setup. She asked why we were at this place instead of going to the park like usual. I said we were trying something new. Denise led us to a small room with a table and chairs and some board games. She sat in the corner with her clipboard while Zara and I played Connect 4 in silence. Zara kept glancing at Denise and asking in a whisper why that lady was watching us. I said she was making sure everyone was safe. Zara asked if I'd done something wrong. I said no, just some grown-up confusion that would get worked out. Denise wrote something on her clipboard. We played 3 games of Connect 4, and then Zara wanted to draw. I asked Denise if that was allowed. She said yes and provided paper and crayons from a supply cabinet. Zara drew pictures of our old house, the one before the divorce. She drew me and her and Rachel all smiling together. She asked when we could go home to that house. I said we had different houses now, but both places loved her. Denise wrote more notes. The 4 hours felt like 40. Every interaction monitored, every word potentially used against me. Zara sensed the weirdness and got quiet, not her usual self. When Rachel arrived to pick her up, Zara grabbed her bag quickly and said, "Bye, Daddy," like she couldn't wait to leave. I watched them drive away from the parking lot while Denise filled out her session report. She said she'd send it to the court and I'd be notified about next week's appointment. The sessions cost $60 each time, paid in advance. That was $240 a month just for the privilege of spending monitored time with my own child. Plus, catching up on child support, plus rent and utilities. The unemployment checks weren't covering it. I started selling things. The TV first, then the nice coffee maker Rachel had missed during the divorce. The winter coat I'd bought when I'd had a real job. Everything went on Craigslist or to the pawn shop. I picked up night shifts at a warehouse loading trucks for $12 an hour. My body hurt, and my sleep schedule was destroyed, but I needed the money. CPS completed their investigation after 6 weeks. Karen Rothstein called and said her report found no evidence of abuse or neglect, but noted concerns about my financial instability and the ongoing dispute with Rachel. She said she was recommending the court maintain supervised visitation until I could demonstrate stable housing and employment. I asked how I was supposed to get stable employment when all my time was spent at supervised visits and warehouse shifts. She said she understood it was difficult, but the child's best interest had to come first. The phrase everyone used when they meant they didn't trust me. The follow-up hearing was worse than the first. Judge Mackenzie read Karen's report and said, while there were no immediate safety concerns, the pattern of behavior suggested I needed to demonstrate stability before unsupervised visitation could resume. She ordered another 60 days of supervised visitation with a review hearing after that. Rachel's lawyer argued I should also be required to complete parenting classes and a psychological evaluation. The judge agreed. I'd need to complete a 10-week parenting course at my own expense and submit to evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist. The parenting course cost $300. The psychological evaluation was $800. I didn't have either amount. I asked the judge if I could request a payment plan. She said I'd need to work that out with the providers. I left the courthouse feeling like I was drowning. Every requirement cost money I didn't have. Every evaluation was another hoop to jump through. Every week of supervised visitation was another reminder that the system saw me as defective. My sister Diane called that evening asking how the hearing went. I told her, and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said she could loan me the money for the evaluation. I told her I couldn't take it. She said family helps family, and she knew I'd pay her back when things improved. I cried on the phone like a child, and she let me. The psychological evaluation took 3 hours with Dr. Ramesh Kapadia, who asked hundreds of questions about my childhood, my marriage, my relationship with Zara, my employment history, my coping mechanisms. I told him everything honestly. The depression after the divorce, the job loss, the financial stress, the confusion about why bringing a volcano to school had spiraled into this nightmare. He gave me written tests about mood and personality. He asked me to describe ink blots and complete sentence fragments. At the end, he said he'd have his report ready in 2 weeks. He said preliminary impression was that I showed signs of situational depression consistent with major life stressors, but no indication of dangerous behavior or impaired judgment. The relief I felt hearing that was overwhelming. Maybe someone finally saw I wasn't the problem. Dr. Kapadia's report went to the court and said exactly what he'd told me. Hold. Situational depression, no safety concerns, recommended therapy, but no reason to restrict parenting time based on psychological factors. Judge Mackenzie read it at the next hearing and said that was encouraging, but she wanted to see completion of the parenting course before modifying the custody order. I'd started the classes by then, Wednesday evenings at the community center with 8 other parents who'd lost custody for various reasons. Drug addiction, domestic violence, neglect, and me, the guy who brought a volcano to school. The instructor was named Beverly, and she taught communication skills and conflict resolution and appropriate discipline techniques. Most of it was common sense, but I paid attention and did the homework because I needed that completion certificate. Week 6 of the class, Beverly asked each of us to share what we'd learned. When it was my turn, I said, I'd learned the system doesn't care about your intentions, only your actions. That even doing something helpful can be twisted into evidence of instability if people want to see it that way. Beverly looked uncomfortable and said the system was designed to protect children. I said I understood, but sometimes it protected them from the wrong things. After class, another parent named Gerald approached me in the parking lot. He'd been in the group for substance abuse issues and had completed a year of supervised visitation before getting his kids back. He said he'd overheard my story during one of the sharing sessions, and it reminded him of something his lawyer had mentioned. There was a parents' rights organization that helped people navigate custody disputes. They didn't charge for services, just operated on donations. He gave me their website. That night, I filled out their intake form explaining everything that had happened. 3 days later, a paralegal named Thomas Greer called and said they were interested in my case. He said it sounded like the school and your ex-wife had created a narrative that wasn't supported by facts. He said they might be able to help file a motion to modify the custody order back to the original agreement based on completion of all court requirements. He said it wouldn't cost me anything. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Thomas sent me documents to sign and a timeline of everything that had happened. He said they were building a case that the emergency modification had been based on misrepresentations and that I'd complied with everything the court ordered. He said we'd need witnesses willing to testify that I was a good father. I gave him my sister's contact information and 2 friends from before the divorce who'd stayed neutral. He interviewed all of them and said their statements were strong. He filed a motion with the court requesting restoration of the original custody agreement based on my completion of requirements and lack of evidence supporting continued restrictions. Rachel's lawyer filed an opposition claiming I was still financially unstable and the supervised visitation should continue indefinitely. Thomas argued that financial struggles weren't grounds for restricting custody. Absent evidence, they affected my parenting ability. The hearing was scheduled for a Friday in December, 8 months after the volcano incident. I'd finished the parenting course, and Dr. Kapadia's evaluation was in the file. Karen Rothstein had submitted an updated report, saying she'd observed 3 supervised sessions, and my interactions with Zara were appropriate and loving. Denise from the Family Connection Center submitted notes, saying I'd been cooperative and engaged. Thomas presented all of this to Judge Mackenzie, along with documentation that I'd caught up on child support and secured steady employment at the warehouse. Patricia argued I'd only complied because the court forced me to, that the underlying instability remained. Thomas countered that I'd complied with every requirement and exceeded expectations, that there was no legal basis for continuing restrictions. Judge Mackenzie reviewed everything and then asked to speak to Zara in chambers. Rachel objected, saying Zara was too young to be involved. The judge said she was nearly 9 years old, and the court needed to hear her perspective. They brought Zara in, and she disappeared into the judge's chambers for 20 minutes. When they came out, Zara looked upset, and Rachel immediately went to her. Judge Mackenzie called us back into session and said based on all the evidence presented and her conversation with Zara, she was satisfied that supervised visitation was no longer necessary. She was restoring the original custody agreement effective immediately. I could barely breathe. Rachel's face went pale, and Patricia whispered something urgent, but the judge had already moved on to setting a regular review schedule. Thomas shook my hand and said congratulations. I walked out of the courthouse into cold December air, feeling like I could finally exhale. That weekend, Zara came to the apartment for our regular time. No supervisor, no monitored conversations. We made pancakes and watched movies, and she fell asleep on the couch like she used to. The volcano sat on a shelf in her room, slightly damaged, but still recognizable. She'd asked me to keep it, even though she never got to present it. A reminder that sometimes helping someone you love costs more than you expected, but it's worth fighting to make things right again. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.